Captain Logan, and welcome to another collection stream. This is my 7th of these, and we're going to take a break from the comic boxes this time, even though we're in the middle of just the second one right now. I wanted to occasionally sneak in some other collections, and I thought now would be a good time. So we're going to go ahead, even though, again, we're in the middle of a box, but it's been a couple weeks. I had a lot going on last week and wasn't able to sneak one of these in, and I thought it would be cool to come back with something different, and then we will resume the comic boxes next time, probably do 3 or 4 of those in a row at least before we get to another collection, but the point of this series was to go through all of the geeky stuff that I own, and I didn't want to get too far away from the other collections. We've already done a couple of other things before we got to comics. Now we're going to get to my Sega Genesis collection, and I'm going to go through every game I own physically on the Genesis. And I have a collection of about 50 games. I was primarily, and continue to be really, I collect a lot of, when I get Genesis, and I do this very sparingly these days, partly because of price, of course, and partly because I have amassed the majority of the things I really cared about when I was a kid, although there are things that I have discovered since then through emulation and through the Sega Genesis Minis, which are still emulation, but I mean, going through ROMs, playing on a computer, and then later getting into the Genesis Mini, and even still after both of them, because I've got the 2 also, and then after that, hacking that, trying out some other things. So there are some games for the sake of collecting that I would love to own that I've become a fan of since then. Things like Dynamite Headdy, things like Streets of Rage 2, stuff that I didn't grow up with, and not obscure titles by any stretch, but just things I like a lot now, and some of them are sort of buyable and some of them aren't. I love the Ninja Turtles Hyperstone Heist. I think that is an $80, $100 game in box these days, so I don't know when and if I'll ever get my hands on that. I don't know what Dynamite Headdy is up to. I would have to look that one up, but I know Streets of Rage 2 tends to be, I think that's a $100 game in box, maybe it's even a little bit more than that. By the way, part of the reason I had this on my mind, twofold. I a week ago went to a retro game convention, and I did a stream on that, and I talked about getting the Tick on Sega Genesis, which I'll show again briefly when I go through this, because that's the most recent thing that I've added to the collection, and that got me in the mood for this. And also, even though this is not Genesis related, I'm in kind of a retro game mood again, because this week the Marvel vs. Capcom collection is coming out for console, and I'm going to try to stream some of that when it comes out, either Tuesday or sometime this week or over the weekend, if I can work the time out to do it. But sometime shortly after that comes out, I'll try to do a stream on it, and that got me kind of itching to do a game thing tonight, so that's why I'm doing that. But anyway, so when I was growing up, I meant to say this earlier, I was primarily into, like a lot of kids, of course, platformers. And that remains my genre of choice for retro games. And I played a lot of fighting games, and I played a little bit in the way of racing games. And those were kind of my 3 genres. I did not play a lot of RPGs, and I've only dabbled in that really since adulthood, and I've never done more than really dip my toe into it. And so I don't have any RPGs on Genesis. Not that Genesis was a big RPG system. Super Nintendo certainly won the war on that end of it. That was always more of the RPG platform. But there were a lot of Sega had good ones, and of course after that, the Saturn was more of an RPG system. But the Genesis not, especially for and then Dreamcast, especially for Japanese stuff. But I was, as a kid, not real into that. Not a ton in the way of sports games. I've got a couple of those, and I'm trying to think any other major genres. I wasn't a big run-and-gun guy, so I know Gunstar Heroes is real huge on Genesis. I didn't play that until later, and I'm terrible at it. It's a really pretty game. I get why people love that. I just was never a huge into those kinds of games, but that is a really frantic, just gorgeous-looking game on the system, and I was never a shoot-'em-up guy. And a space shooter guy, so not big into the shooters. So a lot of what you'll see is in the platforming arena, of course. There were three different models of Genesis. The Genesis 3 was not really made by Sega and was a much more small, slim system, and I never owned one of those. Maybe at some point, just for the sake of completion, to have all three of them, I'll get that. I grew up with this one. This is, of course, the Model 2, which some people call the Mushroom, and I've got a really unscratched, clean-looking one. This one is gorgeous. I've got another one that is not in as good of shape, and I will probably get rid of that at some point, but I have a couple of these, and you might notice it's got the metal pieces on the bottom to connect to the base that goes for the Sega CD. And hilariously, I have managed to procure 2 Sega CDs, and I own like one game for that system. I've hardly ever played anything on Sega CD that I didn't emulate. And I also have a 32X, which I didn't bring down here, but I will show the games for it. I just don't know where it is in my game room right now. It's in a cubby or a drawer somewhere. But anyway, I didn't know, actually, for the longest time as a kid that there was a Model 1. I thought this was the Genesis. EAE there in the comments is a name I don't recognize. Welcome, good to see you. He says Genesis 2 is the best version. I agree. I'm glad somebody is with me on this. And then this is the Model 1. I think I only have one of these. I can't really tell you exactly why I have multiple systems. I want to say copies of the system, but I've just gotten lucky at yard sales and stuff. And at one point I was reselling a lot, not for video games so much as comics, but occasionally I would just buy cheap things that I thought I would resell, and I have just managed to not do that yet. But anyway, this is the Model 1, and it's not in as great shape, as clean, and also just has a little bit of dust and dirt on it that needs to be cleaned up, but not in terrible shape, this one. And I never loved the look of this one as much, just because it kind of looks like a relic of another time. Like, this remains, to me anyway, I mean, I'm sure to people younger than me that didn't grow up with this stuff, all of this looks ultra quaint, but being the old man I am that grew up in the era that I did, this to me looks a lot more sleek and futuristic and kind of more timeless. And I've always appreciated just how small and again sleek and flat and kind of spaceshipy it looks. And then the Model 1, I like that it's black, but beyond that, it still looks like a relic of the mid 80s with the sliders and the weird kind of speaker thing on the top. I mean, it looks like a speaker. It isn't. I've never really understood what that even was for and what it did. If anybody knows, let me know. But I always kind of imagined this in a brownish color. Like, if you change the color of this, it would look like it goes along with the Atari 2600 or systems that came out in the early mid 80s, and even the blocky NES looks, it has a little bit more of that kind of Sears look, and that's what this is like, except it's black. And this, of course, also came out before Sega's marketing was all about being hip and cool and for teenagers as much or more as little kids, and that wasn't the the company didn't have kind of the memo on that yet. And so once they get to this, I think part of the reason this changed was, I'm sure it was nice for them too that it just fit in a smaller box and all of that, but I think a lot of the reason that changed was for that kind of edgier marketing, and it just looks cooler. I don't know what else to say about it. There were 2 main kinds of controllers for the system. I may still have more, but I went ahead and grabbed these just in case it's been a while since you looked at these. This is and actually, let me look at this real quick, because I may have accidentally grabbed a Saturn controller, but no, I think this is just the Genesis 6-button controller. So this is the 6-button for the Genesis and the controller for the Saturn look really, really similar. at least one of the models of it. But no, of course, this can't be a Saturn controller because it doesn't have shoulder buttons. What am I talking about? So here is the original 3-button Genesis controller that you would have started out with. And then they were nice enough to eventually put out a 6-button controller, which was especially useful for fighting games because it was really difficult to deal with very many fighting games like, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat and stuff without 6 buttons. And, some fighting games were 4 buttons, some were 6 button. Very few fighting games worked real well with 3, and you would have like button mapping and things that got really irritating, where you would have to like press a button to change the button, and it was just really, to change a button, really cumbersome. You don't want that. So anyway, those were the 2 big controllers, of course, and I still prefer the 6-button for how it feels in your hand. I always thought that the 6-button, while smaller, and I'm just going to keep using the word sleeker, was just not as comfortable. I much preferred the I guess I can't say dog bone. That's more the shape of the Super Nintendo. I'm not sure what the best kind of analogy would be for it, but I actually liked the feel of the fatter controller in my hand. Let me go ahead and start going through games now. That was more of the point of this video, but I thought I would go ahead and show the systems as well. And eventually I might do a short tour of my little game room upstairs, and we'll look at the systems again and pan through these games if I do that, but I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the actual games here. We'll start with the out-of-box stuff. My collection is kind of, as I'm looking at it, almost half and half. I probably have a few more out-of-box games than in-box, and like the majority of collectors of this stuff, this will be no surprise to most of you, my collection of games in general for cartridge stuff from this period, I've got a lot more in-box for Genesis than I do for anything else. I think I might own 2 or 3 Super Nintendo boxes. Most people didn't keep those. They were cardboard and fell apart really easily. If you've ever watched other videos of people talking about this stuff, you're going to hear me say a lot of things that that video game YouTubers have said about this stuff, and it's all just true, and there's no way not to bring it up. So I'll go through the obvious as quickly as I can. But for those of you not in the know, Genesis had, and EAE said the old catchphrase that Sega had at the time. Sega does what Nintendo don't. What's interesting about that, of course, is that they came up with that slogan while the Genesis was out already, and then you just had the NES, and so you were comparing apples to oranges. You had a 16-bit system compared against an 8-bit system, and it made the Genesis look like this really advanced, futuristic thing. And then the Super Nintendo came out, and all bets were off because they had comparable specs, even though one system did some things a little bit better than the other, and vice versa. I won't get into all of that stuff right now, but one thing that never changed, that Sega always did, that Nintendo don't or didn't, is Sega always had nicer boxes that you could hang on to a lot longer and that just stand the test of time. These don't tend to fall apart or chip if you take care of them, and they look the same today as they did back then most of the time, which is wonderful, and I wish the other companies had ripped them off on this, quite frankly, and it just got worse as it went along until you got to CD-based stuff. The Nintendo did not follow suit ever, and when you got to the Nintendo 64, they stuck with the cardboard boxes, and everybody threw them away because they fell apart too easily and they crumbled, and what was the point? And then they didn't even give us end labels on those games, and so they were kind of regressing while Sega had it right to begin with, really from the start of that system. But still, there are lots of folks that didn't keep their boxes even with the Genesis for whatever reason. I don't know why. They fit really nicely on a shelf. They were a little bit smaller than VHS boxes. I guess clamshells. When you look at cardboard VHS boxes, which people hung on to better than these because they just fit really snugly, if that's a word, into the tapes into the boxes. But yeah, I don't know. These were comparable in size too, so they fit on shelves really nicely if you just had media shelves. So of course everybody hung on to those, or at least a lot of people did. But for whatever reason, people did get rid of them, and that's fortuitous, especially for some folks these days when a lot of this stuff skyrocketed in value because these things are always cheaper without the box. And so on the low end, a lot of games that even aren't all that popular or well sought after or super rare are going to kind of start at 20 or 25 bucks in box, and they go up from there. And I think the most I've spent on a game in box is 60 now, because I paid that for the Tick, and I got a good deal on that. That was a little bit more valuable, I'm sure, because it's in that cardboard box and they never did a clamshell for it. But anyway, so these things are always going to be cheaper for a cartridge in the first place. Just in case you ever want to get into this stuff, some of the games that I've got here, I would like to get boxes for eventually, and I might start seeking those out, seeing if anybody just has the box lying around that I could buy for 10, 15 bucks, and those things, because they make the games more valuable, sometimes you have to spend more for the box on certain of them than other ones. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and finally start getting into the games. This was a long preamble, but I did show systems, so we have technically gotten the collection stream started. Let me look at the comments real quick before I get into these. Andrew Cazzini, still trying to build up a Genesis collection myself. It's just slightly before my time. Yeah, and that's rough, because if you come to it too late, they start getting expensive. And there was a period of time where Super Nintendo was going up real hard in price, and Genesis was kind of hanging on to the cheaper prices that it had for a long time. And about 10 years ago, I considered trying to get a complete Genesis collection because it was still doable then. And especially post-COVID, all bets are off with that. It would be kind of ridiculous to try to do it now. I could do it over time and really save up money and try to buy out big, collections and get a nice deal on stuff. I don't know if I care that much about a lot of those games to do that. And I've never been after a complete collection of any systems. I'm casual enough with video games that I don't know that I would ever do that. That's the one system that I considered at one time doing that with. Probably not anymore. So I will go through these as lickety split as I can. I don't know if I can do this all in one stream, but I'm going to try. Tyler, favorite Genesis games? Well, most of them I own, and so I will bring those up as I go along. I'll tell you which ones I still really love, and which ones are just kind of near and dear to my heart for childhood nostalgia reasons, and which ones I've rarely or ever played, because I'm sure there are a few of those in here as well. And I did not like I have been with the series. I did not prepare for this at all. I want to let myself be surprised as you guys are. Most of this will not surprise me, but there might be one or two things in here that I have forgotten about and not looked at in a long time. So the first thing is Wolverine Adamantium Rage, which I only own because at one time I was trying to collect every superhero video game in the same way that I collect every superhero DVD and Blu-ray, and that's probably not going to happen now, but I still occasionally will pick up a superhero game that I don't have just because it's superhero, and that's one of the main things that I collect. Although, as I'm looking at the boxes, this might happen. For some reason, this got taken out of its box, and I actually do have the box. So I guess I am not starting with the out-of-package ones, even though that's what I'm attempting to do. I want to make sure I don't have two copies of this. It feels like there might be a game in here. No, there's not. Okay. So for some reason, this was taken out. I don't know if I took this out and tried to play it at one point and then reminded myself, oh yeah, this game is not great. But yeah, this is not a wonderful game. If memory serves, I don't think there is a really good solo Wolverine game. I think they got like slightly better as they went along, and I think the one on NES was maybe made by LGN. I forget now. I do have this complete, so I've got the booklet with it as well. But yeah, I haven't looked at this in a long time. The best X-Men game on the system, of course, is X-Men 2, The Clone Wars, and that has a Wolverine that I believe keeps his claws out all the time. If memory serves, the problem with this game was if you have your claws out, you take damage just for having your claws out, which seems very against the whole concept of Wolverine because he has healing factor. I'm pretty sure that's this game. That might be some other Wolverine game and I'm not remembering it correctly. But yeah, this series is about showing you what I have and not necessarily being an expert about all of it. Okay, well that was weird. I thought that was an in-pack or an out-of-package game, but it is not. So let's start going through the actually just cartridge games that I don't have boxes for. Here is Columns that apparently I paid $1 for at some point. You'd probably have to pay a little bit more than that now, but it's probably $5 or $10. I doubt that Columns is really worth all that much. This is one of my first puzzle games. I probably played Tetris before this, but not by much. And I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. This was one of 2 games we owned on Genesis when my dad first had his Genesis, and he traded in his NES at one point for a Genesis. So I played a bunch of Mario 1, and I think maybe we had Mario 3 on that system at some point, or maybe I just played that at somebody else's house, and then eventually we got the NES again, and I got all of that. But, you know, we weren't swimming in money or anything, and so my dad for a while had one system at a time, and then eventually we started kind of building a collection of systems, and we had 4 or 5. So I was a Nintendo and a Sega kid, and by the mid-90s I had a Genesis and a Super Nintendo, and then eventually a Saturn and a 64. But I digress. Columns, I remember the soundtrack for more than anything, and just the flashing lights and and the colors are really nice. And when I say flashing lights, I guess that's just a memory from childhood where when you play it on the on the easiest mode that gives you hints as you get started. The rows will that you haven't completed yet will kind of flash to give you a sense of where you're supposed to put stuff. And it had kind of like an ancient Greece theme, which was cool. I've also since then played the arcade version of that game on my main cabinets, and it's real comparable. It's pretty easy to port an arcade puzzle game to a system, but the aesthetic of it is a little bit different, and so it was cool finally doing that. But that is probably in my top 3 puzzle games. It's probably that and Tetris naturally, and maybe Dr. Mario, although there's another puzzle game we'll get to here in a little bit in the boxed group that I like a lot, that I got finally in box really recently. And then we have Power Rangers the movie, which I probably rented once. No, actually, now that I'm saying that, I rented it on Super Nintendo. So this game blew my mind when I finally played it a lot later, like into adulthood, because if memory serves, this is the one, and I'm rusty on this, I might mix some things up, but I think I'm right about this. This game actually, even though it was technically the movie, like half of it is based on episodes from the TV show, and then it switches to the movie later, like it needed more material, and it's got chiptune versions of Ron Wasserman Power Rangers soundtrack, which is really cool, and it's not as hard as the Super Nintendo games, which are really difficult. The movie one is especially tough. So of the 2, I would say this is the one to play, but that was one of those weird sets where they're completely different on each system. And I really like that for soundtrack, if nothing else, but the graphics for that system were pretty cool. And then we have, and I'm trying to remember, DJ sent me one of the Power Rangers games, and I thought it was this one, but then it has a price tag on it from a local store, so maybe it wasn't this one that he sent me, or maybe I've got 2 of them, or maybe I gave him his back. I can't remember now. This is the Genesis 6-pack, which was kind of a big deal when it came out, that you could put 6 Genesis games on one cartridge. You think about how many of these games felt like regardless of the fact that now the amount of storage seems really laughable, where you're talking about like nothing close to even a gig of storage. You're talking about like, a few megabytes, right? But it was, it always felt like a lot of these games were pushing the hardware really hard for like how much you could put on a cartridge. And so it was nuts that you could get 6 games on a cartridge. And I don't know if I've ever even put this in. I think I just bought this real cheap at a flea market or a yard sale or something. But this has or maybe I got this from my dad, who runs a flea market, and when he gets cartridges in, he'll let me know what he has and ask me if I want any of them, and I'll get them for a nice discount. So thanks, Dad. He's helped really beef up my collection that way. Sonic the Hedgehog. So, I mean, a game that, again, felt like it was really pushing the storage when it first came out. Golden Axe, Streets of Rage. I didn't realize the original Streets of Rage was on here. Okay, so I didn't think I had Streets of Rage in any way, and I much prefer to, like most people. But it's cool that I have that on cartridge. I should probably put this in at some point, fire it up. Revenge of Shinobi is on here. Columns is on here, so I have Columns technically twice because I have the 6-pack, and also Super Hang-On, which I've never played, but it's also cool that Revenge of Shinobi is on here. I've played one of those, 2 or 3, I can't remember, on one of the Genesis minis, and was enjoying it quite a bit. It's hard. Like, I'm not great at it, but anyway, it's cool that I have that. I kind of forgot that was there. EAE keeps leaving comments, seems to be a big Genesis guy. It is really cool of you to comment and interact here. I have the entire Genesis collection, plus hacks and Japanese games on my EverDrive cartridge. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to do it, of course. The limitation of doing it on the Genesis minis is it's super easy to do, and I forget what the name of the program is, but just look up hacking those. It's very simple to do. You don't have to worry about ruining the system. The technology and the programming is there, and it's fine. You're not going to mess up your system. But some people are sometimes worried about that. But the limitation of it is, I think you can only include like 100 ROMs or so at a time. Depends on the system. Maybe it's closer to 60 or 70. I forget now. It's really easy to take them on and off, though. So, I mean, essentially, you can have the whole library. You just can't have it all at once. Here is the hilarious but also wonderfully playable 2D version of Virtua Fighter 2. And Virtua Fighter is... Did I put an L on an accent? That was weird. Virtua Fighter is my favorite fighting franchise of all time. I'm a gargantuan fan. I own every single game for at least one platform that it was released on. The new one from a couple of years ago, the update of Virtua Fighter 5 is killer, and everybody should try that out. But and it remains pretty cheap on PS4. But I think PS4 is the only way to get it, which is weird. I don't even think you can play it on 5, but I could be wrong about that. I digress. Trying to port Virtua Fighter to a regular Genesis was just preposterous at the time to even consider what that would look like. And when you compare them, of course, you're looking at an extremely stripped down version, but you have to think about it as a different game, kind of. So the frame rate is different. You know, it's slower. The frame rate is slower. The gameplay is not all that much slower, but it plays more like, just because it's 2D, of course, it looks more like a Street Fighter or, some kind of Capcom fighter. But a lot of the moves are still intact. So if you know how to play Virtua Fighter, you're on a 2D plane instead of a 3D plane, but you're still basically playing the same game, and it is really playable. It is really fun to do. I wouldn't play it over Virtua Fighter even on the 32X, but it's amazing that it worked out the way it did, and the sprite art is really nice in it, actually. Also, really good 16-bit versions of the music from Virtua Fighter 2, which is the top-notch Saturn and arcade stuff. But it is kind of unfortunate that it couldn't include the 2 new characters, and weird that it's still called Virtua Fighter 2, because it is those backgrounds and the song. Now I'm just reviewing this, and the songs from that, but there wasn't a Virtua Fighter 1 done that way, and it only has the character roster from that, so that's kind of odd. I can't remember if you can get Dural with a cheat code in that or not. I think maybe you can. And then I guess because I'm there, I'll show my 32X games too, just because I only have a few, and there wasn't a big library for that anyway. And these have gotten a lot more valuable and sought after and hard to get your hands on now. So I don't know what this is. We actually could be doing the thing I've been doing on the comic show and pull out price charting and see what some of these go for. I guess I didn't even think to do that. I know in box, this one's pretty high now. But even in cartridge, I think it's harder to get than what I paid for it, because I probably got this for 25 bucks, and I think it's a lot higher than that now. But this is Virtua Fighter on the 32X, which is a really good port. It's not arcade perfect. It is missing some details, but it plays almost exactly the same. Maybe exactly the same. And I don't have a good way to emulate the arcade version because it's just really hard to emulate for whatever reason. And I've still never found a good ROM for it for MAME. So that's the way I emulate that on my MAME cabinet. So I actually do have a full-sized Virtua Fighter arcade that I gutted and turned into, and when I say I did it, I don't have any technical know-how, but I hired a guy to help me do it, that built my coffee table MAME machine. That's a TV built into a coffee table. It's really cool. And I had him do the same thing with my Virtua Fighter machine because the PCB board was not working anymore properly anyway. And I thought about spending the money to get it fixed, but I already had to put some money into that thing just to figure out if it worked and what was wrong with it. And so finally I went, screw it, I'll just make it a MAME cabinet. I'll make it to be able to play lots of different games. And since 32X is on there, I can at least play Virtua Fighter in some way on that machine. And that's how I emulate it. And that was the whole reason I brought that thing up. Moving right along, I'll just do the 32X when it comes up. Oh, actually, here are at least two more of those, so I'll show those real quick. Knuckles Chaotix has also gotten really, actually more than Virtua Fighter, pretty expensive. I think this game is like 60 at least, cartridge only. I might be wrong about that, and these things fluctuate all the time, but when I was at that convention last week, I think that's what I saw it for, and I saw a bunch of in-box Knuckles Chaotix for over $100, and as I said in the stream that I did there, it was surreal to me seeing several copies of supposedly rare and hard to get your hands on things, where these things are not difficult to get, but everybody's kind of hanging on to them. And not to get too deep in the woods with this, but I guess part of the issue is if everybody online puts them up for a certain dollar amount and nobody's budging and they're not going lower, then everybody's going to be able to command that kind of price for it. Maybe not if nobody ever buys, but it suggests that people are paying it if it stays to that. And then I also have Virtua Racing on 32X, which is the way to play this game from that time period anyway. There is a really cool version of it on Switch that is, I want to say rebuilt from the ground up. I may be wrong about that, but it adds some courses, but it's really faithful to the original. The Genesis version is okay, but this one is a lot closer to arcade perfect. It has more courses, and I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. This is one of the racing games I played most often, and I just like the whole Virtua series. When I was a kid, it was kind of all about that feeling of things being 3D, and even polygonal, they felt more realistic or futuristic. And we were always, as kids, trying to get the feel of virtual reality at home. And you couldn't, get a headset or anything, so the closest you could get was having the kind of graphics that you had in games like that. Experiences like that. Okay, moving right along, here is the ridiculously difficult Jurassic Park on Genesis. I always think of this as one of my favorite games, and then I put it in, and I struggled to even get past the second stage, but I just always liked that you got to play as a raptor. I liked the sound effects and the music in this game quite a bit. The music doesn't play great. I'm dropping everything. The music doesn't play great on its own, as a soundtrack, but it's nice and atmospheric in game. I like all the jungle sounds and stuff. When you kill guys, they make what sounds like a Wilhelm scream, which is hilarious. And the sprite work is really nice in that game. That one was not phoned in, but it was that kind of game that was kind of built for rentals, where it was just in. You'll see a lot of that in this collection, where it was just like obscenely difficult because they hoped that you would keep going back and renting it. Thomas Law, I've seen the Sonic and 3 Knuckles game cartridge combined together on YouTube, and it's some of the most awesome things I've ever seen. Oh, yeah. We can do that here in a minute. And it's just not to be, ageist the other direction or anything, Thomas Lowe, but it's just surreal to me to hear somebody say that because I just grew up with this stuff. And that it was mind-blowing as a kid, but just to think that you're young enough that maybe you didn't actually, grow up with this and you've just seen it in videos. Just makes me feel like an old person. But we can look at that right now. Here is Sonic and Knuckles. And I don't have the best looking cartridge. Also, I need to clean this. It's kind of dusty. This is a game that I really need to get in box, and I just need to get a nicer looking cartridge for. The flap is missing. It doesn't need it. It still works. But this game had a flap that you open up and then you put another cartridge on top of. They called it lock-on technology, so that you couldn't do it with anything, or at least you couldn't use it to do extra things for anything. But you could put like the original Sonic on top of it and just play a bunch of blue spheres, which was pretty cool. But you couldn't put Knuckles in Sonic. You could only do it with Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. But if you lock Sonic 3 in it, I think you're supposed to be able to play all the way through 3 and Knuckles. I've never done that physically. I've only done that emulated. But the one of the big things I was after actually at that convention last week was this in box, and I just couldn't find one where the box was nice enough to pay the price it was commanding, because that, I want to say, was everybody had for 60 or 80, somewhere between there, and there were a lot of kind of I don't know, like cracked boxes, or I can't say cracked, because it's the cardboard one. That's what's irritating about Sonic and Knuckles, is the others all came in the clamshell, but this didn't. I don't know why that is, but all the boxes I was finding, pardon me, were had a lot of damage on them, or even like looked kind of chewed up and stuff. And still, because it's the box, you're paying significantly more. So I need to get a really nice looking one before I finally buy that. But yeah, so I do have this, and it does work. It just doesn't look great. But you could put, let me see if I've got, well, my other Sonic games are in the box, and for whatever reason I don't own a copy of 3. I need to make that happen at some point. And that is in a clamshell, but for whatever reason, I think that one is more expensive than 1 and 2. But I've got those in box right now, so I'll just show you this real quick, because you could put anything on top of it. So you just can't put Knuckles in it. But here's X-Men on Genesis on top of Sonic and Knuckles. And it could get really absurd, because you could put all of this on top of a 32X. And it would still work, and then you just got this mountain of things all stacked on top of each other. It was preposterous. But anyway, that is X-Men on Genesis, which is not as good as Clone Wars, but was still a pretty cool game. And like everybody, I always liked having almost a cold open for a video game, where you play a whole level. It jumps you in, and it gives you a random character, and you might be Psylocke, you might be Wolverine, Gambit, whoever, and then you'll immediately start getting attacked by a tank or something, and you're in this really, atmospheric, kind of wooded level. I think it's snowy, even, if memory serves. I forget. And then you don't get to the title screen until after you've played through this whole level. That was always really cool. But again, that's another game that is a little bit too difficult. And that also had that really bizarre level where you have to reset your Genesis to continue, which was mind blowing, and everybody thought something was wrong with their machine. Oh, sorry, I've got another stack of these cartridges. I've also got the Sonic Mania cartridge, which doesn't actually have the game on it, but was just part of the collector's edition that comes with the Sonic statue that's standing on top of a Model 1 Genesis, which I didn't bring down here. I'll show you that eventually in a collection of statues, or just when I'm, maybe if I show off the game room upstairs. But this was kind of a silly extra just collectible that beefed it up. So it's and I'm just showing you this because it was in this stack. I don't, maybe one of my kids threw this in here. It's not actually a game, but it is just a holder for a ring collectible that comes out. And, you know, collector's editions are cool, but they'll beef it up with extra stuff like this, and they end up charging more. Sometimes I wish it was just the statue, but yeah, that was kind of fun. I just wish the game was on it. That'd be cool. And you can't put it in the system because Sonic is standing on top of it, and because the cartridge slot doesn't actually work. Okay, let me take another drink break real quick. 40 minutes in, we might get through all of this tonight. Here is one of, as a kid, my favorite platformers on the system. It holds up okay. There's a level I tend to stop on with it. I kind of get a little bored with it eventually, and I don't end up playing all the way through it when you get into the caves. But I do still like this game a lot. It's a little bit of a Sonic clone with some Mario 3 mixed in, but this is Tiny Toon Adventures Buster's Hidden Treasure. All the Tiny Toon games were really good. That was a line that never disappointed. There were a lot of different kinds of games, and even the mini game cartridges were pretty good. I've got one of those in here too. Oh, actually, that's the next thing, so I'll show you that in a minute. This is another game that I thought I had the box for, but maybe I don't. I'm remiss on that. I'm going to need to get that at some point. And I think this might be my childhood copy of this, although I'm not sure. This was a game that I think we rented a lot and then ended up finally buying. Or maybe we bought right away. I forget. But this was one that we played all the time. Along with Bubsy, which is a much maligned and hated game, but we didn't know any better and we loved it a lot. We played that right after it came out. And it's got all kinds of problems. That should be in here somewhere. I'm not seeing it right away. It's an oversized, weird-looking cartridge. And I don't think I have that in box either anymore. That one I don't have my childhood cartridge for. I don't know what happened to some things that I used to have and I had to replace when it comes to video games. But I digress. This is one of my most recent acquisitions, and I bought this because I saw a video, I forget if it was on SNES Drunk's channel or where it was, that was talking this game up, and it looked really fun. He was either talking about the Tiny Toon games or just sports games on Genesis, I forget. But this is Tiny Toon Adventures Acme All-Stars, and this has a basketball game that is a little bit, and this is the reason I bought it, that is kind of similar. It plays a bit differently, but it's arcadey in the same way. It's a little similar to the Looney Tunes B-Ball game on Super Nintendo, which is one of my favorite 16-bit basketball games. And if you've never played that, you should try it because it's a lot of fun, and you get to do a lot of fun, like cartoonish special moves in that, and this does the same thing. It's also got a soccer game on it that I haven't messed with much, and I forget what other games are on it as well, but I went ahead and bought the cartridge for that because it was cheap, and you know, I can emulate it, but I like the Tiny Toon games, and when I hear about a good one that I didn't try, it's cool to go ahead and grab that for my collection. And I also have Looney Tunes B-Ball, so it felt like getting its, kind of counterpart or successor or something. And then here is the Power Rangers fighting game on Genesis. A lot of people look at this and assume that it's going to be a beat-em-up like the Super Nintendo game, and again, Power Rangers had this kind of weird history of different games being put out for different systems. I'm not sure why that is. Like Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition, on Super Nintendo was not on the Genesis, and this was a far inferior fighting game to that. That game was a Megazord fighter that came out during the third season, so it's got Shogun Megazord and Ninja Megazord and stuff that couldn't have existed at this point. This was first season. I have a lot of nostalgia for this game. This was the first game I remember ever beating, and that felt like a big deal, even though it was kind of an arcade-esque fighting game, and it was very, very easy. But I was like dumb 10-year-old kid, and it felt like an accomplishment to me. But it was neat because of some of the first season monsters that you got to play as, and like Madame Woe was in it, which was odd, and you get to be Green Ranger but fight the evil Green Ranger. And the only thing that was kind of irritating about it was if you play as Rangers, and you're playing like Ranger against Ranger, or even I think against monsters, I forget, you end up always fighting on a bridge, and that's the only place you get to fight as Rangers. And then the Megazords had some other places they fought, so I don't know, that was kind of odd, but that was a 3-button fighter, and so it was very limited in moveset, and gets old pretty quickly now, but felt like a really cool thing at the time because it represented the source material quite well. Robert wants to know if any of the Ninja Turtles games are decent on Genesis. Yeah, there's not a ton, but everything that they released is quite good. I forget, so Tournament Fighters, which we'll get to, it's actually right here, but this game was also different between Genesis and Super Nintendo. It had a different roster and played slightly a little bit differently. Music's all different. The look of it's different. And I forget which I liked better for which system. I have them both. It's just been a while since I played them. You can, by the way, play all of that stuff, like everything that came out during that era, 8 and 16-bit, on the Cowabunga collection that's to be available for Switch and other consoles. So, Robert, if you wanted to, you could try all this stuff yourself as far as Turtles goes. I was always partial to Hyperstone Heist. I like it as much or more than Turtles in Time, which is kind of blasphemy, but I like the kind of more typical Turtle settings more than the jumping around in time, which is a fun novelty, and I get why people really appreciate that game on Super Nintendo, because it added stuff that wasn't in the arcade, but I also really like the look and the sound and everything of Hyperstone Heist. I don't own that. That game is pretty expensive these days. I think it's maybe 80 or 100 in box, and I'm not sure how much cheaper it is cartridge only. I think it might be, maybe it's even like 100 in box and like 60 on cartridge. I forget now. I saw some of those, or at least one or two of those last week at that convention too. And that's a tempting thing I would like to eventually get my hands on, but Turtles in Time now is between 60 and 80, but I think Hyperstone Heist is actually more expensive. So maybe it's more than 60. I can't remember. I would have to look that up. But anyway, I digress once again. Here is X-Men 2: The Clone Wars. Like I mentioned earlier, it has nothing to do with Star Wars, and this was before Clone Wars was a massively related to Star Wars thing. It's before the movie and TV shows and all of that, naturally, of course. But this is some of the best giant sprite work done on Genesis, and it's just a gorgeous looking game. It's tough as nails, and I doubt if I'll ever beat it. Oh, here is a fighting game. Oh, there's Bubsy. Here is a fighting game that I adore on this system. My dad and I played this all the time. We played Virtua Fighter more than anything, but we also played a decent amount of Fatal Fury 2, which was special and unique at the time because of the kind of two planes you could jump between. You could you fought toward the bottom of the screen, and then you had a way to jump up to a different level. I say that makes it sound like you're on platforms, but you're not. It's just like two different planes that you can jump between. And I always liked the guy with the stick. I can't remember his name right now. I think he was like an Italian guy. But this was sort of like a Street Fighter knockoff, where you're a bunch of different characters from different areas of the world. But I always liked the way Fatal Fury played these what is that company? Somebody will tell me. Is it SNK? I think that was the company that made these fighting games. So they were a big rival of Capcom and both pumped out just tons and tons of fighting games. And this was always my favorite, Fatal Fury 2. And I have subsequently played some of the Fatal Fury's arcade versions now on my main cabinets, but I'm still really, really partial to that one. With, what is it? What is that guy's name? God, it's been too long. Bogart. I forget his first name. Here is Bubsy, the much maligned, not very loved mascot game from Accolade. People don't give it a great deal of accolades, but I still have kind of a special place with this game. I will occasionally go back to it, and then I'll remind myself about how much more frustrating it is now than when I was a kid. But just because of the kind of repetitive nature of it, like with Sonic, you have to play 3 stages for each level, and they're very, very samey, and they're way too long. And as soon as somebody brought up in a video that I saw once, hey, there's all these yarn balls you collect. They don't do anything. I went, oh yeah, that does kind of suck. Why am I getting all these yarn balls? They don't even give you extra lives. There are t-shirts that you get that give you extra lives. What in the world is the point of the yarn balls? Especially because the bad guys want them so badly. Like, who cares? The bad guys get them. They don't even do anything for you. What is the point? But I always loved the cartoonish nature of it. I don't think it gets enough credit for, as early as it was, some of the impressive graphics things that it does. Like, people don't like the level design, and that's fair, and they think that the look of it is just okay, and sometimes, again, it's very samey. But it was kind of cool that this is ripping off Sonic, but if you wait too long before you start moving your character again, he starts knocking on the screen and shakes the whole screen. And that felt pretty impressive on Genesis. It also had some voice work that was, people find it irritating. What could possibly go wrong? But it was really smooth and sounded good, and a lot of attempts at that didn't work very well. So as a kid, there was a novelty to it that I still get why I felt that way, but I've lost a little bit of it, I have to admit. And not just because I'm jumping on a bandwagon, but just because I was blinded by my enjoyment of that game as a kid and didn't notice some of the things that people have complained about that they're absolutely right about. Here is another tough as nail games, one of the hardest games in the Genesis, Vector Man, or at least for things that I've played that I have attempted to get anywhere with. I can't get past the second level. I don't know if at this point I could get past the first level. Vector Man's tough, but it's gorgeous. This is another 3D looking game. Like it's on a 2D plane, but the character work is 3D, and I can't remember if it was pre-rendered graphics or how it managed that, but it is a really neat looking game. It is kind of run and gunny, and I was never good at that. I'm not a Mega Man guy, and you probably have to be to get anywhere in something like Vector Man, but the character is cool looking. He's got these pieces that aren't really actually all connected to him, and he can kind of change shapes, and he shoots like lightning bits out of himself, and he was just super cool looking. Thomas Lowe, I have seen videos of Bubsy online, and people just complain about how frustrating the game is difficulty wise. Yeah, and I've gotten decently far in it. Like, it's not as hard as a lot of other games that I own and have tried to get through on Genesis, certainly, but it's unfair hard, and tries to compensate for that with giving you lots of lives, and I see two sides to that a little bit, because it wants you to die a lot so that you can see all the like clever animations that it has for deaths, like it's a Warner Brothers cartoon. And the problem is, it's not really the point of trying to get through a game. And if you die constantly just because you got too close to an enemy that blew on you, or because the screen kind of scrolls ahead of you when you're running so you don't see a thing coming at you, or because of leaps of faith, there's a little bit of that in that game. Actually, kind of a lot because of fall damage, which is also a thing people complain about with that game. If you're not gliding, you will splat if you fall from a high place. And as a kid, I didn't mind all of that because I was buying into the theme of it. So I was going, I'm playing a cartoon, not just a typical video game. And that works on you when you're like 8, 9, 10 maybe, and you watch a lot of old cartoons. And you go back and you try to play it now, and all of that is kind of lost on you. And so I think that's why it didn't bother me as a kid. Here is the original Mortal Kombat, which I also thought I had the box for. Maybe I don't. I played Mortal Kombat a little bit here and there growing up. I don't think my dad really had, and I wouldn't have played this at my mom's house. She didn't have a Genesis. I don't think my dad ever really minded the whole blood thing and all of that. I don't think that was a big deal. I forget now if we were allowed to play games like that or not really, because there wasn't a lot of that even really appealed to me. Mortal Kombat wasn't a fighting game that I got immediately excited about. Just looking at, like, the aesthetic of it wasn't really my thing. And so I came to it a lot more later and have appreciated it more, honestly, oddly, as Jason's become a big fan of that game. And I just always felt like not just the aesthetic wasn't as cool for me as some other things, but I just always thought it was too stiff. And now that I've played it more and kind of learned the rhythm of it, it is that way, but I get it. Like, I've kind of fallen into it now. So I like Mortal Kombat. I think I'm with Jason. I think I like 3 more than anything. Robert Cap was analyzing Bubsy before he was analyzing superhero movies and not realizing it. I mean, I just took that as a given. Is like, this is what this is. You're playing a cartoon. Okay, people are leaving. I gotta stop talking about Bubsy now. So let's see. It's getting late. We're about an hour in. I'm gonna keep plowing through and see how quickly I can get through the rest of this. I've got a few more out-of-box games left, and then I'll decide if I'm going to quit or just go ahead and blow through the boxes. Oh, there's Mortal Kombat 3. That's why I thought I had a box for 1, because I do have 3. Do I have the... So I'm trying to remember. There's, I think, a good Mortal Kombat and a 3 and a bad one on Genesis. I think, like, Ultimate is supposed to be good, but the 3 is really crappy. Am I remembering that right, folks? And anybody that really knows this stuff? Forget. I think I have the crappy one in box. But I don't know. It looks cool on a shelf. Here is Mickey Mania, the timeless adventures of Mickey Mouse, and this is a game that I also have lots of nostalgia for. I would get easily impressed with graphics that I didn't think were possible on this system in Super Nintendo, which is why, like a lot of kids, I jumped into Donkey Kong Country real hard, and then that game was just also really playable and a wonderful experience, and I still play it a ton to this day. I had a period a couple years ago where I got up and I played Donkey Kong Country every day, and I was trying to get good at speedrunning it. Mickey Mania is difficult. That's another, like, almost unfairly hard game. I don't know if I've ever gotten much past the ghosts, which is like, I don't know, the 4th or 5th level. So I can get a little farther in this than some other things. But it was a really clever idea. This is another one I thought I had the box for. This one I will try to procure the box for if I don't have it. Because this was kind of a special game for me on Genesis. It was a really cool idea. It was a neat premise where you played through major popular Mickey Mouse cartoons chronologically up through the decades. And so it starts with Steamboat Willie, and then it goes to the Mad Scientist, and it keeps going. And it also had some really cool kind of 3D looking sections that kind of look like Mode 7, but aren't, because it's Genesis. The color work in that game is really good, and it was legitimately fun. It was just honestly a little bit too difficult. You could jump on things, but you also had things that you could, I'm not sure what they are, but you had these little pieces that you collect that you could throw at stuff. And there was a little bit of puzzle work in that game also. That wasn't hard, but it was just kind of varied it up a little bit. And I played that first at a friend's house where I had a sleepover that will never leave me. It was kind of a pivotal moment for me for fandoms and stuff because, and I've talked about this on the channel before, but this kid, his name was Bud. I remember that. I remember his name, and he had a birthday party every year where he had friends over for a sleepover, and I had just met him recently and was becoming friends with him, and had not done it before. And he had these killer sleepovers where you stayed up most of the night and played a bunch of Genesis and board games. And he was a comic guy, and he saved comics that he didn't want anymore and gave them away at his birthday party. And that's how I got into Spider-Man. I was not a Spider-Man guy or a Marvel guy at all before that party. And I got, I think, an issue from Maximum Carnage or something, and that sold me on Spider-Man and the symbiote simultaneously, which is why I became such a symbiote fan so hard. But that was a game we played a bunch. And the next game in this stack is also a game that I came to at that kid's house, if memory serves, and that's Maximum Carnage, which I own 2 copies of on Genesis. I do believe I'm looking for it here, and I think I've got the other one. I don't see it right away. Oh, there it is, yeah. So there was a red cartridge and a black cartridge, and I think this was the only red cartridge on the entire system, which is kind of mind-blowing that they didn't do more different colors. Super Nintendo didn't really do that either. And it's red on the Super Nintendo also. So I might be wrong. Maybe it's one system had some different colored cartridges and the other one it was only red. But I thought that was true for Genesis. I might be wrong. For some reason, they released it both ways, and I have the black one and the red one. I didn't realize that until recently, that I owned them both. But it's cool that if I have them twice, it's that other color. But Maximum Carnage was the beat 'em up that I played the most on that system. It doesn't hold up as well as I remember it. It is also ridiculously difficult and gets kind of repetitive, but I still love the look of it, and I still love the soundtrack, and I like the way the levels vary up a little bit, where you start with just a typical beat 'em up level, and then the second level you're web swinging, and it's a little bit tedious, but it's cool that they mix it up, trying to get away from energy blasts and stuff. The boss fights are pretty tough, and it follows the comics really well. The next game, we're just going to continue our theme of preposterously difficult. This is The Adventures of Batman and Robin, which had a really weird soundtrack. I'm one of the guys that kind of likes that soundtrack, but not really for a Batman game. It's so far and away from what you'd think this should sound like. And mostly just because it's animated series, so you want Shirley Walker music, and it doesn't have that. It sounds more like it's one of the most Sega sounding soundtracks, but it sounds almost more like in arcade, sort of like run and gun thing or something. And this game is pretty run and gun-esque. I think that would be a way to describe it. But yeah, it's ridiculously hard and has some of the most impressive graphics on the system. If you can get through it, there's a lot of like thrilling, pretty stuff to look at, and you might want to use save states and cheat codes, because it's probably the only way you're going to make it through it, unless you dedicate your life to knowing everything that's going to come at you in that game. It's really freaking hard. Even harder somehow is Comic Zone, which is, like, I've got the same review everybody else does. It's beautiful. It's the coolest idea in the world. You're going through actual comic panels in a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It's got some cool puzzle solving. The soundtrack is killer. Most people can't make it through the first stage. Why would you want a game that is this impressively executed, and 95% of the people that play it are not going to see the last level? I mean, it's just absolutely nuts. And I've never really seen past the second level with this game. Like, I like to think of myself as a fan of this, but I've not even watched a whole playthrough, mostly because I want to be able to do it myself. And I'm 40 years old, and I've still never gotten through this very, very far in this game. But it's such a cool premise, and it looks great, and it sounds great. And apparently they're going to make a game based on this movie that doesn't sound like it has hardly anything to do with this game. But anyway, someday I'm going to get good enough to get through this game. I don't know when that's going to be. Okay, one second. Okay, I'm debating about finishing this now because I'm starting to get a little tired. It is past midnight, but I think I will go ahead and try to blow through it. I'm fading a little bit, but I think I'll be all right. Because it looks like I've got fewer games in box than out of. I thought maybe it was half and half, but I think there's fewer games here. Let's try to do it. Let's see if we can blow through this. Thomas Lowe, I played Aladdin on Game Boy a lot when I was a kid. The final carpet section is awesome. Oh, cool. I've never played that on handheld. And I've talked about this before, but I didn't. Thomas Lowe says finish. Fine, I'll do it. We're getting late enough. A lot of folks have left already, but they can take a look at the rest of this later on. I did not grow up with handheld systems. I didn't have a Game Boy or I want to say Sega Nomad. That would have been really cool. That was the portable game that played actual Genesis games. God, was Sega ahead of its time. But I didn't have a Game Gear until very recently. I bought one during COVID, and it's really cool. Jason plays with it still quite a bit. Okay. I feel like I'm going to pass out. No, not really, but I'm getting tired. But I'm going to try to finish. So, here is Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, which I alluded to earlier. And I'm going to pop each of these open and find out if I have them complete. This one I don't have complete, but I do have the game in the box. So, I don't know. Maybe at some point I'll get crazy and try to get the booklets for all of these things. Like I said, I don't remember the whole roster for this game or how exactly it differs from the Super Nintendo. I think I liked this one a little bit better than the other, but it's cool that they're both quite different, and they are pretty fun fighting games. There's a little bit more variation in them. They're kind of more replayable than, say, that Power Rangers fighting game on the system, but it's not the most replayable thing, and I think it might still just be 3-button. I'm not sure if you use a 6-button, if you get more moves and stuff. I don't think you do, though. I wonder if it mentions anything about that on the box. But this is early enough. I doubt that the 6-button even existed yet. It doesn't look like it. But anyway, moving right along. So I brought this up last week when I bought it, but last week, the week before, whenever it was, but here is the Tick now finally complete in box, and I do have the booklet for this one. Once again, stupid cardboard boxes, but I'm glad I've got one that looks decent enough. It's not perfect, but it's intact, and it doesn't have a giant crease or anything anywhere. This game is not good. I'm not going to pretend like it is, but I've still got a lot of nostalgia for it, and as I've said a lot, when I was a kid, I never thought any video game was bad. I just thought I didn't know what I was doing. It never occurred to me to be critical of games. So it's really funny that Robert was saying that I was analyzing games back then, because it was more that I was a dumb kid that thought that everything was fine, and I could justify anything that wasn't working as I just don't understand it and know what I'm doing. Sometimes I think I'm still like that, because I was complaining about how I'm not any good at games, and when I can't figure them out, I figure it must be me. I will do a full playthrough stream of the Tick at some point, because I just think it'll be funny. It's really redundant. The levels are stupid long. It takes like 4 or 5 hours to do, and if I max out lives and Arthurs, I can do it. It is fun to intentionally fall off the roof and fight some of the characters that you fight when you go off the roof, because that's where some of the comic characters are. There's a cool blend of comic characters and TV show characters. It's neat that it kind of follows, I mean, there's not a lot of story in it, obviously, but it kind of follows the first arc of the comics, with Night of a Million Zillion Ninjas, and then it goes to Chairface, and then it goes to Thrakkerzog, and there's a mix of stuff from the TV show with comic story stuff. And when I was a kid, it was really weird, all the characters and things from the comics that never showed up in the show. Where I'm like, I don't know who these people are. Who the heck is Paul the Samurai? Who's Oedipus? Like, I don't understand any of this stuff. Why is Thrakkerzog pink? Like, it's all very confusing. And I would love to know the story behind this game. Like, was it somehow already a little bit in development before the TV show happened? Like, I wouldn't think so, but not only why are there comic things in it, but why are some of the characters from the TV show based on the comic versions. The comic models, like, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. It's very strange. It's also odd, and I mentioned this in that video I did when I bought this, but it's weird that it's MA13, mature 13. I said I was baffled by this when I bought it and I did that video in the parking lot. I was like, why on earth would this game get a mature rating? In mature 13, the rating system was different back then. And I thought about it, and the only thing I can come up with is Chainsaw Vigilante. It's got a character that wields a chainsaw, and even though he doesn't kill anyone horribly violently, there's no blood or anything, you don't see his chainsaw like scraping up against anybody. It's the only thing I can figure. Or that it got 13 because it's just too weird for children. The best I can come up with. Here is the aforementioned, although it was mentioned on a handheld console, but Aladdin on Genesis, which is considered the best of the Aladdin games by most people. I'm in the camp that says that they both have their charm, but Aladdin is probably the superior game to the Super Nintendo one. I haven't played through much of this since I was a kid. I think I nearly beat it when I rented it. But yeah, the Disney stuff, most of it was kind of unbeatable graphics-wise and really good implementation of the music from those movies, and like most of them look good. The Beauty and the Beast games look really good. Pocahontas looked really good. That was mostly like a puzzle platformer, where like it is a platformer, but there's all these puzzles you have to solve to get to the next place. And anyway, I'm glad to own it just because that was one of those games I really liked a lot as a kid. Let's see if this one has the booklet. It does indeed. So I have that complete, and this was back before as many... Sorry, I'm not aiming this at the camera. This is back before as many people cared about collecting for the system, so I apparently paid $5 for this at a half-price books, and I'm sure it costs more than that now. It would just take a lot longer if I started looking at price charting, but there's part of me that wants to. I am going to just real quick see what Aladdin goes for. I got to move some stuff around because in box I paid $5 for it. And that couldn't have been much more than a decade ago. So it'll just be interesting to see what that commands now. Just one moment. Maybe we'll look at a couple more of these too that I was curious about earlier. But especially in box, I kind of want to know what a couple of these things are worth. So Aladdin on Genesis. Complete in box goes for about 18. Okay, so, I mean, it's not super valuable, but that's 3 to 4 times what I paid for it. Okay, moving right along. Here is the Jurassic Park box. So, some of the games that I showed you already, I do have the boxes for, apparently. At least one more. So, yeah, there's the Jurassic Park box. Do I have that complete? Yes, I do. Okay, so Jurassic Park is complete. Done. We finished that. We knocked it out. Thomas, I have the same problem with not finishing a game when I was a kid. It's a TMNT game on the Game Boy. It has a Metroidvania-like gameplay, and it's fun. Yeah, which one is that? Because I tried, I think all 3 of those to, for a while, just sampled them when I got the Cowabunga collection, and a couple of those are really quite fun, and I want to spend more time with them. I think I was playing the Metroidvania-like one. I think it is the one that you're talking about. That's real mazy, and I was really enjoying that. I thought it was really cool. Something else I wanted to mention earlier is the Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighter games. If you have a way to emulate them with a fight stick or on a like on a MAME cabinet or with like a converted arcade 1-up, I have I have both of those things. I have 2 MAME cabinets, and I have a converted arcade one-up to play my Switch with, which is really super cool. But anyway, those tournament fighter games play great as arcade games, as does the Power Rangers Fighting Edition on Super Nintendo. That's one of my favorite things to pull out on the MAME cabinets. Anyway, so here's my other Maximum Carnage. And like I said, I own both of these, but not complete, unfortunately. So I'll have to try to get the booklet for this at some point. But there's the red cartridge. I've proved it. It's red. And then here is, oh yeah, like I said, I thought I had Mortal Kombat in box. I do. This is the box for it. For whatever reason, the plastic is starting to come off of it. And it says, this item for sale only. Okay, so this was maybe at one point at a rental store, but this one they were trying to sell for $55. I think even now, as these things have gotten expensive, it is not worth $55. But it's probably worth more than the $5 that I paid for. Once again, I paid $5 for this game, but not at the same store, not at Half Price Books. And this was also mature 13, but more understandable, because there's blood in it, and even Chainsaw Vigilante didn't have blood. Thomas Lowe, did you put the games on display, Cap? No, not really. I have considered getting like some of those cool plastic holders that people make to display certain of them, but I have not done that. I just stack them on the shelves, and there's holders that people make for the cartridges out of box, which would be cool to have, but they take up a lot of space, and I don't really have the room with as many cartridges and disc games as I have. I probably own in total like 300 or 400 games physically, probably maybe more than that. I'm not sure. Between all the different systems, it's funny because I never think of myself as a video game guy. I have a lot of video game stuff. Not compared to some collectors that this is all they do, but for like a comic guy that dabbles in video games, I've got a decent sized collection. Okay, and then here is Mortal Kombat 3. Again, I think this is the crappy Mortal Kombat 3. Let's see if we have crappy Mortal Kombat 3 complete. I forgot that this was put out by Williams, too, which is known as much or more so for their pinball machines. This is complete, so that's cool. The booklet is a little wrinkled, but it's in there, so that's cool. And then this is a game that I like a lot, but it is, everybody say it with me, too difficult. And it's easy to get stuck in, but not like I don't know where to go so much as just how do I pop my guy up to the next place where I'm trying to get to. This is Sonic Spinball, which is a pretty divisive game on Genesis, both in gameplay and in soundtrack. Some people think it sounds like Dying Cats. Some people, like me, I think that it's actually got some pretty cool tunes, and it's not conventional Sonic music, but it still sounds Sonic-y enough, if that makes any sense. And it's the kind of grungy type stuff that Genesis did well. There's one track in particular that's a little bit irritating. Like some people don't like the top score music, but I don't mind it. But I get why people think it's irritating. Some of it is just nostalgia. Whatever. I played this game a lot when I was a kid. I could not get to the second level for years and years. And I have made it to 3. There are only 4. That's how long it takes to get through things in this game. But my wife is quite good at it. I don't think she's beaten it, but she's better than me at it. It has no booklet. I'm going to have to remedy that at some point. Andrew, Cap, just from observation, you are indeed a video game guy. Yeah, but you wouldn't think it from watching my Cap Can't Play streams. That's why I call them that. It's the only way I can put out video game content and sleep at night. Here is, which I feel like doing right now, but because I like you guys, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to finish it. Here is, I'm going to take a nap sometime tomorrow, but I'm going to finish it. This is X-Men on Genesis. We already talked about this game. It feels like it has a game inside. Why do I have this game twice? I don't know, but I do. Here it is again. So was I thinking that I didn't have this and forgot it was on the shelf and then I bought it again, or did I see it in box and there was a cool price and I was like, I don't care that I have it again? I don't remember. I have no idea, but I do have this in box, and it has a really nice looking manual too. I love the art on the manual in the game box. It's the same, but it's good. So, you know, I don't care. When I was growing up, a lot of game manuals you would only see at rental places, like photocopied. And so you'd only see the black and white versions. And then you'd get the real game, and then you'd be really surprised when the manual was also black and white. It wasn't always, though. Another game that I have in box, because we're in the in-box section right now. I'm getting delirious now. Here is Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Crossroads of Time. This game is hilarious. You just run around as Cisco, diffusing bombs and stuff. The layout of the station is pretty cool and surprisingly close, given that it's 2D, you know, sprite work. The graphics aren't bad, but it's not an especially fun game. And the soundtrack is kind of terrible. It's kind of lame. This was also in a cardboard box, but is in decent shape, this box. Let's see if I have that complete. Let's find out. See, these boxes were also annoying because you had to take the slipcover off. And then here's the game nestled inside. For those of you youngins, this is what a game box looked like on the Genesis that wasn't a clamshell. And so then I would have to open one end or the other to even see if I have the manual. Is it worth it? Do we care that much? I can't actually tell, and I'm afraid I'm going to rip it trying to open this. Let's see. I don't think I have the manual. I don't see it. But I do have the... Am I going to pull this out and read it? Are we going to waste time and do this? Why not? When else are we ever going to have the opportunity to do this? Okay. So I don't have the manual, but you know what I do have? I do have the Star Trek Deep Space Nine Crossroads of Time consumer reply card. I have that. Oh, you can't even see it. Oh, there we go. I have to turn it like this to prove that it's not a blank piece of paper. Okay. Thank you for buying this quality Playmates product. Okay, that's crazy. I forgot that Playmates bankrolled this, because Playmates had the Star Trek license for action figures. That's amazing. Let's read this. Are you ready? We appreciate it. In fact, if you fill out this card and send it back to us, I'll get right on that. We'll put you in the running for free stuff like action figures and other valuables. That's pretty much what you guys made, except for this game, apparently. And, you know, like toy phasers and stuff. Just so you know, we'll make Playmates products the best that there are always. Thanks again. And sometimes we'll create artificial scarcity and only put out enough for the people that work at Walmart to steal them before anybody else gets a chance, and then make all of our fans mad to the point where we lose the license because we can't make them anymore. Because that happened. But I digress. Product purchase because I saw an ad, got a great review. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is a really funny survey. How would you rate this game? You guys ready for this? Mega radical. Like, you can't exaggerate the surf talk of the 90s. This is what life was like when I was growing up. And I miss it. It was wonderful. How would you rate this game? Mega radical. That's the top. You can't get any better than that. So, way good. No way. No way is great, because that's like Sonic. I can't believe this garbage. That's the worst you can do, I think. What's funny about it is it's actually kind of difficult to tell what is the top and what's the bottom, because they go side to side. So I'm actually not sure. They're not numbered. What kind of games do you like best? Adventure, role-playing, multiplayer, action, sports, or puzzles? How many hours a week do you play your video game products? You know, because as kids, we thought of them as video game products. 0 to 1, 1 to 5, 6 to 10. Okay, now I see what the order is supposed to be. 11 to 15, and 20 plus. I knew those kids. What type of video game systems or computers are in your household? Check all that apply. Oh, this is interesting. This is actually really interesting. How late in the Genesis life cycle did this game come out? Well, the show doesn't start until 94. No, that's not true. I'm thinking of Voyager. The show starts in 93, So this was pretty late because unless this was like a re-release version. Sorry, I want to look at the box for a second. Uh, oh, and you got a special edition Cisco action figure with the purchase of this game. I never got that. I wonder if it was a different one made for this, or if it was the regular Playmates one that they were putting out already. Sorry, I'm spending too much time on this, but this reply card is fact. This is part of why I wanted to do this series. This crazy stuff like this comes up. Okay, so anyway, I got to tell you guys about this because it's really interesting. This is a Genesis game, but these are the options. I will read all of these of video game consoles in your house that you can check off. Sony PlayStation, Sega Saturn, Sega Ultra 64. Okay, so that means the 64 is not out yet because but the PlayStation wouldn't be yet either. So it abbreviated to do Sony PS, but the 64 was not called the Ultra 64 unless they actually used that in PAL regions, but I didn't think they did. So that's interesting. So maybe this was 90. Maybe this was 95 because the game is all first season. Nintendo Game Boy, Atari Jaguar, Macintosh, IBM, or PC compatible. 32X, Sega CD, Super NES, not SNES, Sega Game Gear, Sega Genesis, and Nintendo Entertainment System. I don't know. That's really interesting to me. That Ultra 64 is listed that way, and that the PlayStation is already on here. That's wild. Okay, I'm glad we took the time to do that. It was worth it. It was worth it for me. I've gotten a second wind because I just read an exciting comment card. I'll try to put this back together without ruining it. I feel like I'm back in 1995 again. It's Christmas, folks. We just opened up our presents. We got DS9, The Crossroads of Time. Aren't you stoked? I can't wait to play that. I can wait to play this. This is Spider-Man, or known more often as Spider-Man the Animated Series, because look at the art. That's what it's based on, for the Sega Genesis. And this game sucks. It has one of the worst soundtracks ever, and the hitboxes are weird, and the level layouts are awful, and it's just an absolute tedious slog to play. I reviewed it with Genesis Gems a few years ago, and it was a gigantic chore. But the art's cool, and the box looks nice, and I have it complete. And it's a superhero game on the Genesis, so I'm glad I have it. That would be a thing to collect at the very least, all the superhero games on Genesis. Why not? Maybe I'll do that at some point. See what I'm missing. I know there's stuff I'm missing. I know I don't have Captain Planet. That game's not very good. Okay, I have Sonic 1 and 2 in box. We'll see if I have them complete. These are the games that I played most often on the system and that I still pull out all the time. I play a ridiculous amount of Sonic. Even still, I'm set in my ways because I'm elderly now. Okay, so I have it complete. It's not in the best of shape. Maybe at some point, because I'm a prude about Sonic, I should get a more pristine looking box and manual. Maybe at some point I'll do that. This is Sonic 2, like I just said. Let's see if it's complete. It is, and the manual looks quite a bit nicer. Okay, folks, I've got just this stack. We're going to get through it. But I have to take a real quick break, and I'm sorry for doing that. I'm debating because I'm like, well, I don't have enough to do a whole other stream. But it's late at night, and I'm hearing one of my kids crying upstairs, so I have to take care of that. So apologies for the wait here, but I am going to pause, and I will come right back. Okay, apologies there. One of my twins, one of my daughters, was upstairs crying, and I had to go take care of her. But she's fine now. She's back in bed, and I'm going to be going to bed myself here in just a little bit. Here is the Death and Return of Superman, a Sunsoft game for Genesis that was pretty much the same between Genesis and Super Nintendo. I can't remember if the soundtrack and effects sound better on Genesis or Super Nintendo. It was always one or the other. Very often it was Super Nintendo, but when you had a soundtrack like this that was a little bit more rock-ish, it tended to sound better on Genesis. And I think Genesis is the way I played this more often. Although, to be fair, most games that were on both, I tended to play on Genesis more. And some of them were better and some of them were worse, but it was superficial. I liked the controller and I liked the look of the system better, and I always thought of myself more as a Sega kid. So when things came out on both systems, I would typically rent it on Genesis because I knew that they were more or less the same. But there are some games that I admit sound better on Super Nintendo, but I'm so used to for Genesis, I still typically go back to it that way. The Tick is not one of those. That actually sounds better on Genesis, and that's the only way I like to play that. I like it. I like Bubsy better on Genesis. And stuff like Earthworm Jim is better on Genesis. But anyway, this game is also ridiculously difficult, and you about have to have level select codes in order to play the whole thing. The sprite work is pretty decent. It is very mediocre as far as beat-em-ups go. Robert was asking me if I would ever do a playthrough on this, and I probably will at some point, but again, I would probably use cheat codes. I'd probably use level select codes for that. Andrew says one of the better Superman games, and that ain't saying a lot, is it? Unfortunately. But I always loved the box art for this, and obviously I'm a giant Death of Superman fan, so it was a big deal to me that that was a game, and of course that was popular enough to get its own game. That Maximum Carnage, like, it's kind of crazy now that I'm thinking about it that Nightfall didn't get a game. It could have. I mean, it was that big. Thomas Lowe, there are no FMV videos on Genesis games, right? No, 16-bit couldn't do that. And even 32 couldn't really. Well, sort of, kind of, when you got to, like, because the Sega CD had some of that stuff. So now that I'm thinking about it, yeah, that's not exactly true, but you got to a lot more of it when you got to Sega CD and then Saturn and stuff. Okay, so this was another recent acquisition. This is Pack Attack, which I just procured complete in box, and this is another of my favorite puzzle games. This is like a Tetris. You're eliminating lines just like in Tetris, but you also have a Pac-Man, and you create a path for him to come down and eat pellets and ghosts through, which is really fun. And it has a neat soundtrack as well. Jason doesn't understand why I like that game. I don't understand why he doesn't. Whatever. Andrew, you have a Saturn cap, definitely a Genesis kid. Not only do I have a Saturn, but I saved up for it and bought it a year after it came out with my own money, or shortly after. I say shortly after. I got the Saturn that came with 3 games. So that was when they were getting desperate and really trying to move them. So it was definitely sometime after it came out. I always think of it as not much more than a year, though, because I always remember the 64 had recently come out and I had to pick between them, and that's the one I ended up buying. But I vacuumed my dad's restaurant that he managed most weeknights, and he would pay me $5, and I saved up my $5 for quite a while, and I bought myself a Sega Saturn. It was really cool. Here is my dad taught me things about working hard and making money, and it was a real big deal working like that, getting just $5 at a time to eventually be able to buy something like that. Here is I Echo the Dolphin, which is one of those everybody is supposed to have in their collection, and then I play it, and then I'm not totally sure why. Yeah, it was a real novel idea, and it looks gorgeous, but I could never figure out what the world I was supposed to do. And I'm told that the sequel is a little bit easier to navigate. I've tried this a few times. I don't really understand it. I've looked at videos on it that make the whole thing sound really, really frustrating, and now I've kind of lost interest in trying to get good at it. But I do have it complete in box, and I think this might have been a thing that I got when Brandon was working at a thrift store, and he would let me know when they got games in because they were always really cheap. They always priced them exactly the same, and they don't do that anymore, but they used to. Here is The Incredible Hulk, which is kind of a mixed bag sort of platformer slash beat 'em up. I also reviewed this with the Genesis games, with Genesis Gems, pardon me, on their podcast a year or two ago, and I enjoyed it well enough. It could have been more polished, but anyway, the sprite work with the Hulk is great. I love how big and huge he is, and he's got some cool, special moves and stuff. I do have that complete as well. What's funny is, I think I emulated it and didn't even think I owned this game, and then it wasn't until I reviewed it with those guys that I noticed it on my shelf. Or maybe I noticed it just before the review when I grabbed it and we talked about it in that podcast. I can't remember. It's on Spotify. You can go listen to it and find out. The Genesis Gems. Check it out. Here is another Star Trek game. Echoes from the past, Star Trek The Next Generation, which was on a few different platforms. This was even on the NES, if memory serves, which is kind of crazy. And it had cool enough looking graphics, if you want to call them that. It took a lot of photos from the game, or from the show, and distilled them down into 16-bit, and you could go around the bridge and do different things. You beam down to planets, and you had to warp to planets, and it was a little cryptic about what you were supposed to do and where you were supposed to go. But the idea behind the gameplay was sound. It's just that once you got down to planets, it wasn't really fun dealing with your away team and fighting guys, and it was really easy to get picked off, and it was hard to tell what you were supposed to do, like I said. But anyway, did I open this already? No, I did not. Okay, this is interesting to me anyway. So this I do have complete, but this was a rental copy. There were a few games like this that I probably rented enough that I ultimately ended up just buying, and with the Tick, even though I don't have my childhood copy, but I wouldn't have had that full in box anyway, because it was just the cartridge from the rental place. That game I played enough that eventually the rental place just gave it to me, which was really, really funny and nice of that guy. But it was a little kind of hole-in-the-wall independent place. But this is a black and white instruction manual that clearly was in color when it was first put out, or at least that's kind of what it looks like. And this came from Movie Mart. This came in Morrilton, Arkansas, from back in the day. And this was, I'm pretty sure, that same place that I was talking about. So it's odd that I have that, but I didn't somehow keep my old Tick. I don't know why. Thomas Lowe, you should do Cap can't play on Star Trek games. You have a few titles to play for a whole hour. I could just go around sampling stuff. I did play this one sometime early this year or last year, I think, on a Cap Can't Play. So you can watch me crash and burn on that. This is one of my favorite 16-bit games of all time. I still go back to it quite a bit. I wish I was better at it. I typically get through the 8th or 9th stage, and there's like 50-something. This had a lot of levels. But this is, of course, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, which I talk about all the time. It's got one of the best soundtracks, in my opinion, on the Genesis, at least for the kind of game it is. And I did finally get an in-box copy of this at Game Nut in Lawrence, Kansas. If you're ever in Lawrence, check out that store. The one downtown has more video game stuff. The one on, is it 23rd Street or Iowa Street, has more board game stuff. Choose Your Poison. Both stores are awesome. Go look at that if you're ever in this area. But I think I paid $30 for this one, maybe $40. It'd be more now. I forget. But this is just a few years ago. Anyway, that is a top-down game where you go around killing zombies and saving people, and you've got a map, and you got to figure out where all the people are, and you get different weapons and different items that let you heal yourself and turn into monsters, and it's just really creative and inventive, and it might honestly be the sole reason that I eventually became a closeted and now not so closeted zombie fan. I probably have this game to thank for that whole thing. I've got 4 left, gentlemen, and the next one is Captain America and the Avengers. There are guys that swear by this game. I don't understand why. I don't think it looks very good on Genesis. I never have. The box art is awesome, but I just think it's horribly trimmed down from the arcade version. And you know, this is a Data East game. They also made the arcade version, and I don't have this complete. I'm missing the manual. It's okay. It's a beat 'em up. It's not that hard to figure out. I don't need the manual. And apparently there was at one point a collector's pin inside. So that's interesting. Even back then, we had these bonuses. And I don't know if they were like pre-order things, but we had bonuses sometimes for games. But obviously you weren't going to get arcade perfect stuff with games from this period, you know, on 8-bit or 16-bit, but you don't have to play the arcade game to see that, like, it didn't have enough colors. I never thought it looked great, but people love this game for whatever reason. I have a copy of it. I don't think it's great. And then here is Spider-Man and X-Men on the Genesis. Sorry, there's a game I'm looking for that I would think I had on Genesis that I apparently don't. Oh, you know what? I probably only have it on Super Nintendo. I'll talk about that in a minute. So Spider-Man and X-Men, another game that's not great. It's maybe marginally better than the one that I just showed you, but this is another, like, going around trying to figure out where you're supposed to go kind of game. You're defusing bombs a lot at the beginning, just like Deep Space Nine. It was a novelty to have Spider-Man and X-Men in the same game. Like, that was kind of cool. It looks okay. It's nothing to write home about. This was a pretty early game for the Genesis, if memory serves, and it was put out by a company called Flying Edge. And then we get Spot Goes to Hollywood, a sequel kind of to Cool Spot, which is another platformer that I love, and I played mostly on the Genesis. I think I must just have it on Super Nintendo right now for some reason, or I've got a game or two not with the rest of this for some reason. I kind of expected that to be in here. I'm not seeing it. And I thought I owned that game. I thought I owned the Spot games for every system, but maybe I just have a copy of each one that came out on a system, because there's like 4 of them. I'm not sure where that is. So if I don't have one, I'll have to get it eventually. It's not going to cost much. This game's not great. This is an isometric perspective, and it's kind of difficult to shoot things, and it's just not as much fun as the original, and I wish they hadn't reinvented the wheel on it. This is like trying to turn Spot into sort of a Zombies Ate My Neighbors type game, except it's more, well, that's not even exactly right, because it's more linear than that, but it's just okay. This game also came out, if memory serves, on the Saturn, and it looks better on that system. It's kind of a fun idea, having Cool Spot go through. I've always been a big Cool Spot fan. I love that mascot character. And he goes through a bunch of kind of generic movie themes. Like, I think it starts with pirates, on a pirate ship. It's okay. And then finally, I do have Earthworm Jim on Genesis. I don't have 2 right now for whatever reason. I should get that at some point. This is another game I think I got my hands on because Brandon was working at a thrift store, and he called me up, and I got a few of these games together. And it's still in the not-so-great cardboard box. Let's see if I have that complete. Oh, here's the instruction manual right on the top. Let's see if it has a survey or anything underneath. No, it doesn't. I was hoping we could read more surveys, but apparently not. No Thomas Lowe. It's not the supervillain, this Spot. Cool Spot is one of those things I'd like to get a tattoo of eventually. I have, 3 or 4 things in front of that when and if I start getting tattoos again. I've slowed down on that. I lost my tattoo guy. He's disappeared off the face of the planet. I can't find him. So at some point, I'll start getting tattoos again. But anyway, that is everything I'm seeing right here. I might be missing 1 or 2 things. If I am, I will bring them up when I go through other stuff. Like, I thought I had the Star Wars arcade on 32X. I don't think we talked about that. So yeah, there seem to be a couple of things missing, but that is more or less my Genesis collection. Look at that. We did it. We got through it. Well, thanks a lot for watching, everybody. And eventually I'll go through my other video game collections. I've got about this much for Super Nintendo. I've got maybe a little less for NES. And then I have several, and 64. I probably have 40 games maybe. And then I have a significant number of games on various disc-based systems. So I'll do each of those one at a time. And the systems I don't have very much for, I'll do kind of all together at some point. Like, I love Saturn and I love Dreamcast. I have only a handful of games for each of those. But I've got those games that I played a lot and was worth having that system for. Pardon me. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for me this evening. I'll be back with lots more fun stuff here this week on Geekvolution. If you're watching this as it's coming out or live, we're going to be doing the new Beetlejuice movie tomorrow night at 10 o'clock Central Time. So pop in for that if you're so inclined. And in the meantime, I was Captain Logan. Thanks a lot for watching. More collection videos coming next week. Bye, everybody.